I would like to introduce Gail Gibbert. Gail, I would love to say, is a Cowles County Master Gardener, but she is not. We have borrowed the expertise and the strength of the Lewis County Master Gardeners tonight, and but I got to know Gail when I was up in Lewis County. Just such a delightful group, and so appreciative of their willingness to share and work with us and help us and share Gail's expertise. So really helpful with that. I would ask that you mute. If you don't, I'll probably wind up muting you, so that way Gail doesn't have quite any of those distractions that come up. You will be able to put questions in the chat box. I'll get back to Gail on those. And at the end, we'll open it up, and certainly anybody that has a question, we can respond to that. So Gail, I still am not seeing your presentation yet. And you should be able to hit share screen, and it should come up. We all love Zoom for its technical difficulties. Oh, I'm seeing something happen, and there it is. So, Gail, you are muted right now, but barring that, your presentation is up, and we are ready to go. So thank you so much, Gail, for speaking tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, I usually don't use this computer, so I couldn't find the mute unmute, but now I find it. And at the moment, my cursor is working, but as soon as I play the PowerPoint, it won't. So let's see. You can hear me now, okay? Right.
We can hear you. Perfect.
Okay, now my cursor's in the way for my PowerPoint to run. Oh, there we go. Yay! Okay, does that work?
It does.
Okay, this is good. Let me change this screen on the side. Oh, this is weird. It's weird not having a cursor. I don't know. Okay, well, I'll just leave it. Okay, so I have a whole screen on the side of people, but I don't have a cursor that I can undo it. So, okay, well, that's okay. Okay, so I'm in Lewis County, Master Gardener. Since 2015, I did Master Gardener program once I retired. I was a teacher in the Portland area, and I moved up here from Portland, Oregon, because it's much more economical, of course, to live here than in Portland, and not near as many crazy people up here. And so I'm enjoying living here, and I learned a lot about hydrangeas over the last 40 years in the Portland area. There are some fairly well-known hydrangea commercial growers there who sell nationwide and probably worldwide, and I've been to their nursery many times, and talked to the owner and the previous owner before that over many years. So that's my expertise in hydrangeas. At my house in south of Portland, I had about 30 different hydrangeas, and I would have had more, but I only had a half acre, so that kind of limits you. So anyway, up here in Centralia, Chehalis, we have a hydrangea garden at Providence Place Demonstration Garden. And one of our demo gardens, we have a hydrangea area. This is not a picture from there, but anyway, that's why we work a lot with hydrangeas up here. So here's what I can tell you about hydrangeas. There are 23 species in the family, so there's not very many different species of hydrangeas. They all do really well where we live here. They're all deciduous shrubs and vines. There's a few vines that they're really just shrubs with long runners that can vine or run along the ground. The thing about all the species of hydrangeas is they all require a lot of water. And so that's what the hydra in their name, hydrangea, that's the word for water. And all the hydrangeas everywhere in the world prefer morning sun and afternoon shade. There are some varieties we're going to see that can take full sun, but they do better if they have morning sun and afternoon shade. So even if they can tolerate it, that's still their best. So I'm going to talk about the different types of hydrangeas that are common, not all 23, but just the ones that are commonly planted in people's landscapes. about how to plant them and transplanting, fertilizing, and how to prune your hydrangeas, by which type of hydrangea they are, and a little bit about diseases and pests. In this PowerPoint, there isn't much about propagation, but I'll try to fit that in with the pruning, because while you're pruning is a perfect time to be propagating them too. Okay, so that's our topics. So here's a nice chart I've made of the types of hydrangeas and some of the things that are, these are the common ones in our area, and some of the things that we care about hydrangeas, like when do they bloom? Their bloom time is really important. How big their flowers are. There's small and there's large. There's lots of different flowers. A lot of them are really good for cut flowers to bring in your house. What's really nice about people for flower arranging is you can take one large mop head hydrangea and put it in a vase, and you've got a whole, vase of flowers all in one stem. So they make really great flowers for in the house. And then one of the big problems and topics on hydrangeas is how to prune them. And so once you understand that, it's really easy to do, but otherwise it's a mystery for a lot of people, how to prune their hydrangeas. So I'm going to go over each of these different kinds. I put them in this PowerPoint alphabetically, not necessarily by the most common to the least common. They're alphabetical here, so I hope that's okay for you. So the first one, if we're going to start with the letter A. So the first one is Hydrangea Arborescence, and this would be what we would call the Annabelle Hydrangeas. Arbor means, of course, tree, so these are, the original arborescents were very large. I wouldn't necessarily say tree-like, but they gave them that name. So these are always white. They always have round flowers as opposed to conical flowers, which we're going to see in some of the others. They all bloom on new growth, which we're going to talk about later is going to be very important. And these can take some full sun, but again, part sun is actually better. These are one of our hardiest kinds of hydrangeas. So if you go to the eastern United States, to New England, and you see hydrangeas, they're most likely arborescents. They're most likely these Annabelle hydrangeas. They're in everybody's yard there because they're really hardy in that cold winter. We have them here, but they're not as common because we can grow all of the more exotic and the brighter colored hydrangeas here. But they are still worth having in your yard, although they're pretty large. They can have small flowers or they can have really large flowers. I've seen one at a county fair. In fact, I think it might have been the Cowlitz County Fair because I used to go there quite a bit. And it was, I didn't measure, but it was probably 15 inches across, one flower head. It was gigantic. It was the biggest one I've ever seen. And it was an arborescence. These make really good cut flowers, so they're sold a lot to the flower industry. And buy flower arrangements in the summer, or you use flowers at weddings and things. This might be one that you would use. They start blooming in May, and they bloom all the way to frost. They'll only bloom, though, one time. So an early one will bloom, one won't bloom in May and then have another flower in June and another flower later. They just bloom all at once, but anytime in the summer. There are new ones. We just planted a new one last summer at our demonstration garden that has star-shaped flowers. So they're on all of these flowers of hydrangeas, there are really two parts in a flower. There's the fertile part, which is really, really small in the center, and then all of these big petals that you see are non-fertile flowers, so they won't have seeds, and they're showy to attract your pollinators, and then the actual part that has the seeds is really, really small. And so, okay, what was my point to that? Oh, so these new star-shaped ones are really, really neat because they have star-shaped white large petals, and then they have a little center with all the, with your stamens and pistils in the center, and it looks like, they're really pretty anyway, so you'll probably see some of those around. That's the one you see at Christmas time. Sometimes they'll have hydrangeas at Christmas time, and they have these star-shaped flowers, and that's what these are. Okay, and so here's how we would use these. They're always going to be white, and they're used very commonly as foundation plantings. They make a really nice, you can make a whole hedge out of these. They're great. Of course, in the wintertime when they lose all their leaves, they're pretty ugly, but the summer is great. Oh, okay, so look at this one. Here's the one we just planted. Oh, actually, I just planted both of these. That's why I put these in here. So this one on the top left side has the little star shape. See the little star-shaped petals on those flowers. Those are really neat. And then the one that I planted called Bounty down here on the bottom right corner is a dwarf one. The whole plant only gets 3 to 4 feet, and the flowers are smaller and real compact. Okay, so our next kind of hydrangea is the aspera, Hydrangea aspera. And these are very large plants and have very large flowers. All of their flowers are going to be a foot across. And they're very dramatic in your garden. And there are quite a few of them up in Olympia. You see them in gardens pretty regularly. These all have fuzzy leaves. And so that's how you can tell them right away. They're really fuzzy. They, again, like part shade. Their flowers are always blue or purple. And here, if you look at this top picture, I don't have a pointer here. The top picture really shows you the 2 types of flowers. So the dark purple ones are the fertile flowers, and these white, light purple ones that are around the outside are the infertile flowers that are there to attract your pollinators. So that really shows the 2 different kinds. They're similar to a lace cap, which we're going to get to in a little bit. Okay, it's weird not having people ask questions along the way, but here we go. Okay, here's a close-up of a Hydrangea aspera. And now these are, I said they're large. By large, I mean that these are 10 feet tall and 8 to 10 feet across. They're huge plants, but really dramatic. Our next group is the climbing hydrangeas, and there's several different kinds. So I just put some pictures of 3 different kinds on here. They do need shade. They're still hydrangeas, even though they're kind of climbers. They need to climb on a structure because they don't have the little tendrils to hold on to things. So they climb on a structure. They bloom at the same time, May till frost. And they have really large flowers also. And notice that the flowers are pretty similar to what we just saw on those Hydrangea asperas. They're very similar flowers. 6 to 8 inches. They're always white. They haven't developed any other color. They're naturally white. And on this kind of a hydrangea, we're not going to talk much about pruning. We just prune them for their shape, and otherwise just kind of let them ramble. If you don't have a structure for them to grow on, they will go along the ground and spread out and run all along the ground like a ground cover. And I've had them do that at my house before. They can actually be kind of a nuisance when they spread too much on the ground. The climbing hydrangeas, I don't know if you ever have planted them, they take a few years to get going. So you'll plant it and it'll kind of sit there for a year. Well, that's okay. Lots of things sit for a year. Then the next year it still sits there. And the next year it still sits there. And it doesn't do a lot, not a lot of new growth. It doesn't die, but what's it doing? Then all of a sudden, after 3-4 years, it will really take off, and then it'll be a plant like in these pictures. So don't be disappointed, or don't be discouraged if you buy one and it just sits there for a few years. That's pretty typical. There is a variegated one, which I have, that's kind of got a chartreuse edges and the dark in the center of each leaf. And that really sits there for a lot of years. Okay, now here's macrophyllus. Hydrangea macrophylla is our most common kind of garden hydrangea. This is the ones that everybody has, and they're the mop heads, and they come in mop heads and lace caps. They're both the same species. So macrophylla means large, phylla I think is leaf, right? So it's like a big leaf hydrangea. They can want shade or part shade. These can take lots of shade. They bloom on last year's growth. And their bloom, I skipped over here, but the bloom is sensitive to the pH. And we're going to talk about that in a minute here. They bloom the same time, May to fall. They have medium to large flowers. And these are the best of all cut flowers. So these are the kind that you can dry and keep in the winter time. And if you pick them at the right time, they dry really well and keep a lot of their color. they'll lose their color. So they're going to be the brightest when they first open, and then they'll lose their color gradually in the sun especially, but as the summer goes on. And so when they feel kind of leathery and they're starting to dry out a little bit naturally, you can pick them and dry them, and they'll keep whatever color they have at the time that you pick them for about a year. Then eventually they fade. But the next year you can pick some more. Here's some examples of mop heads and some lace caps. And on the mop heads, you don't notice, you can't really see the fertile flowers, right? But on the lace caps, you can see the fertile and the infertile flowers, the same as we were seeing in those other types of hydrangeas. Most people, we don't grow a whole lot of hydrangeas from seed, only at, when they're developing a new one. Here's some of the newest things from Monrovia. Monrovia Nursery down in, I guess, Dayton, Oregon. Dayton is just south of Dayton, Oregon. And they've been developing some really nice colors on hydrangeas. And so I really like some of these new colors. They're hard to find, but there's some really exciting things going on in hydrangeas. And of course, there's the hydrangeas that bloom on old and new growth that have been developed lately. And those are a cross between macrophyllus and arborescence in order to get, or are they a cross between that and paniculatas? They're a cross between two species, and that's how they can get them to be ever blooming. Like the one called Endless Summer, you guys probably have heard of that one. You can buy that one at Home Depot and Lowe's and places like that, probably even Walmart. And it blooms all summer on old growth and new growth, and that's because it's a cross between two different species. Okay, paniculatas are the other really common hydrangeas. These do really well in our climate. You might call them, in the old days they called them PG hydrangeas. And these bloom on new growth. I think these are what they've crossed to make those endless summers. They can take more full sun than other hydrangeas, although they still really prefer a little bit of shade. But they can take quite a bit of sun. And they bloom, same thing, summer, later in the summer than all these others we've talked about. So in our garden there at Providence Place at the demonstration garden, our paniculatas are the very last ones to leaf out, and they've only had leaves for the last 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, they were bare sticks, and people were saying, oh, I think they died. And no, just wait. These are the last ones to leaf out, and they're the last ones to bloom. So they're going to start blooming later. So they make a really good fall flower, or in August when there's not much except dahlias and hydrangeas. You're going to have plenty of hydrangea flowers. They bloom on the new growth, so that makes it easy. We're going to talk more about that. And these are also a really good cut flower. So by good cut flower, I mean that if you cut it and bring it in your house and you want to make flower arrangements out of it, or just put it in a vase, it'll last at least a week. It might last 2 or 3 weeks. It's really good. It'll naturally start drying right there in your vase. Now these flowers are always conical, so you can tell these apart from the arborescence are always round. These paniculatas always are conical flowers. They can be pretty small. There's one we have called Little Lamb. Oh, I think it's in the next slide. It's really tiny. Or they can be really, really large. And again, at county fairs, I've seen some that were more than a foot tall and 8 inches across in diameter at the bottom. They can be huge. They originally were all white, and people have been developing these other colors in them. So originally they were only white, and then they started getting this green color that's in this left-hand one. There's one called Little Lime or Limelight. There's several with the word lime in it. That's the green color. And then they've developed a pink color, and they've gotten quite a bit of red in them now. So, I wish I had the scale here. So these white paniculatas here, the one called Little Lamb is really tiny. The flowers are only 3 or 4 inches. And Tardiva here is a big tree-like plant, and the flowers are all over a foot. But you can't tell. I should have put a ruler up in these pictures. Can't tell on my pictures. Sorry. But here's the new colors that they're working on. So this vanilla strawberry is fairly commonly found. I've seen it the last 3 or 4 years for sale, again, at places like Home Depot, and all the nurseries have this one. And I have friends that, I don't have this one, but I have friends that have this one, and it really is that color. If it gets too much sunlight, the sun will bleach it out. So you want a little bit of shade, but they really are that color. So they've been real successful in getting some color into these PG hydrangeas. Okay, now here's probably, here's a really neat one. This quercifolia, which means oak leaf. The oakleaf hydrangeas are native to the United States. All of these others come from the Orient, from China mostly, and they're very common in Japan, and they're originally from the Oriental countries. But this one is our own native hydrangea. So it's native in the southern United States. So it takes a little more heat than a lot of these others, but it still likes to have some shade. In fact, they can grow in total shade. They have a great fall color and peeling bark, like in this lower picture. They really do look like that. They're great. They bloom late spring to summer, so they can be blooming pretty soon, May and June. They'll start blooming. They have originally all have white flowers, and they're conical also. And on these, you can really tell by the shape of their leaf. You know, you'll know it's an oak leaf by the shape of its leaf. They can take less water than these other hydrangeas. They still need lots of water, but they're not nearly as dependent on water as all of the other types of hydrangeas. This is the one that can take the driest. See the fall color in that bottom picture? They have great fall color. I think everybody should have an oak leaf hydrangea somewhere in their yard. You have to have one. They're the best. Now, the newest thing in oak leaf hydrangeas is that they have developed pink ones. And we did plant one of these last summer also. And we had 2 flowers on it. So this summer, I'm hoping we get some more flowers. So there is now a pink oak leaf hydrangea. It's not a very pretty pink, but you know, it's a start. There's also dwarf oak leaf hydrangeas that are, because they're a good 6-8 feet tall. They're a pretty big plant, the native ones. So the dwarf ones are more like 3 feet. And also, I've seen some oak leaf hydrangeas that were developed for their fall color. They have very large leaves and very good maroon fall color. So that's one of the things they're doing with oak leaf hydrangeas. There's lots of exciting things happening with these. You can find all kinds of new things. Okay, so we're getting near the end of this. The Hydrangea Serratas. Serrata means they have serrated leaves, although so do the macrophyllas. So you can't tell always just by that. They also bloom on last year's growth. They bloom the same time. Their flowers are smaller, 4 to 8 inches. We don't have any 12-inch. You know, they're smaller flowers, but they usually have a lot. They're usually totally covered in flowers. They want part shade, same as all the hydrangeas. But their flowers are always purple. This is the only color so far, this different shades of purple and bluish color. And these are very large plants. Most of the time, although there is a new dwarf one, which we did also plant 2 summers ago at the garden. You have to, once, you know, if you're really interested in hydrangeas, you need to come up and visit us at Providence Place Garden, and we can show you all these. We have all of these and plus a couple of others. So here's a new one that we just planted called Tiny Tough Stuff. And this is everybody's favorite hydrangea at the hydrangea area of the garden. It's the best looking plant there. And it's, it was 2 feet high last year. I'm expecting it to be about 3 feet high, and then we'll kind of keep it from that. And 3 feet across, and absolutely covered with flowers. And like I say, it's everybody's favorite. The flowers last for months. Once it starts, they're there all summer. Okay, so let's go into how to care for your hydrangeas. So when you're planting them, of course you want, for your site selection, you're going to look for the morning sun and afternoon shade if you can, or at least some shade, especially afternoon, and not under trees, because the trees are going to take most of the water, and these plants really need a lot of water. So they're really, really good as foundation plants along your house. Well, that's kind of, yeah, otherwise you need to get a little further away from trees. If you have a grove of trees or several trees, you know, put them out at as far out on the edge in the shade as you can, because Or have them in large pots and water the pot, and that way the tree doesn't get to steal all their water, because they really do need a lot of water. They can take any kind of soil type, even clay soil, they do okay. They would like drainage, but they are not as susceptible to root rot and things like that as other plants. They really do use a lot of water. You space them, most species 4 feet apart. Some of these, though, I've been telling you about are 10 feet across, so, it depends on the species. They have shallow spreading root systems, so they don't want to be planted very deep. And because of that, also, it's easy to transplant them, even a large plant, an old plant, because they will have a lot of roots, but they're not very deep. So it's pretty easy to dig them up and move them. You would normally plant them, let's see, what is this? When to plant them? Early summer and fall? No, early in the fall. Yeah, you wouldn't want to plant them in the middle of the summer when it's too hot, because they would not be able to get enough water and they would wilt every day. You can tell when they're not getting water because they're going to wilt. Their best time to transplant would be when they're dormant, like any plant, November, December. January is pretty darn cold. By February, they're going to be starting to come back. They're going to have buds by then, but you can still transplant them then. And of course, like I said, they have these shallow, wide roots, so they're pretty easy to move. If you get the foil-wrapped gift ones that are from the greenhouse, if you plant them right outside in the fall before winter, they're probably not going to survive. So you would want to keep them until spring and plant them then. Fertilizing, because they are growing a lot, they put on a lot of leaves and a lot of flowers, they do take a lot of fertilizer too. So you would fertilize them 1 or 2 times, but not after August, because you don't want any growth right before winter, because before it might freeze. And they take any kind of balanced fertilizer, so 10 or any kind of mix. They do use a lot of nitrogen, though. You'll notice that your nitrogen, your first number in all of these is pretty high, or at least equal, because they put on a lot of green growth. So they're going to need that. And then, of course, like any plant, how much you give them is going to depend on how big they are. So anywhere from 1/8 of a cup up to 2 or 3 cups of fertilizer. And of course, you can use organic, and it's really good. They would love to have compost and manure and things like that too. It doesn't have to be chemical fertilizer. If they're sick or wilting, don't fertilize them, because they're stressed, probably from lack of water or too much sun and heat. And if you put on fertilizer and they try to grow more, it's just going to stress them even more. And then we use some special kinds of fertilizer or soil additives to change their bloom color. So this is what's really neat about the macrophyllus, not the other kinds, but all of those macrophyllus. We can change what color they are by controlling their pH. It's totally based on the pH. And so if your pH is acidic, 5.5 or less, you're going to have blue flowers. If you have a pH between 5.5 and 6.5, you're going to have purple flowers in between. And if you have a high pH, 6.5 or higher, you're going to have pink or red flowers. This is just in the macrophyllus. And so it's up to you to decide what color you want. Or you can just let it, whatever's natural. Like if you have a forested area, where there's been firs in the past or currently, you're going to have acidic soil, and so you're going to have all blue flowers. But here I live in Centralia and River Bottom, and it's very nice, and I get purple flowers here. I'm a pH 6.5 headed almost to 7, and I have really nice purple hydrangeas here. And so you can add lime to the soil in order to get your pink or red flowers. If you want more blue, then you would add ammonium sulfate. And they even make fertilizers you can buy that include the fertilizer and the ammonium sulfate or the lime. If you want to do that, you can buy it already prepared. But it's pretty nice that you can choose. Okay, so pruning is the big thing on hydrangeas. And so the thing is hydrangeas can bloom either on new growth or on old growth. And by old growth, I don't mean really old. I mean just last year's growth. And that's the same thing that's with grapes and berries and things. You know how, they, same kind of thing with a lot of different plants, not just hydrangeas. So all of the ones that bloom, so the different species are going to be either new growth or old growth, or by old growth, like I say, I mean last year. And so we would prune them different ways. Anything that's on new growth, I think I have it. Okay, yeah, here we go. Let's do old growth first. So old growth, which would be your macrophyllus mostly, and some of the others, you would always take out dead wood, of course. That's on any of them, cutting them back. And hydrangeas do die back a lot. They die back from cold, but also they always have these canes coming up that are hollow and they die. And so don't worry if you get a lot of dying canes. That's totally normal and typical in these hydrangeas. If you have so you would remove, if you have a really large plant, you might have to take out up to a third of the old canes back all the way to the ground. When you prune back to the ground, that stimulates the plant hormones to put out new canes and new growth. And so eventually you can take a really large plant and get it back down to a manageable size by cutting it a third of the canes back to the ground each year for 3 years. And by then you'll have a whole new bush. You want your bush to be, well formed but kind of open in the center, same kind of like roses, but it's not as touchy as roses in order to get airflow. And now here's the important thing for your flowers. If you cut back to the old growth, that cane will not have flowers that year. It has to have some buds from the last summer. So you cut all of the ones to 2 sets of buds from the top. So you go down and find where, and I'm going to show you in these pictures, and I wish we were at the garden and we'd go out and look at this. You go down to where it was cut last year, and it'll have new canes coming up, and you want 1, 2 buds, and then you cut. Like here's an example. Here's a plant before being cut. And then so if you look on this picture, see there, you're cutting in February or March when you can already see growth on the buds, new leaves coming out. You want to cut back so that there's only 1 or 2 of these buds left and everything else is cut off. It might only be a few inches, or you might be cutting 4 or 5 feet off if it grew that much that year. You just want to leave only 1 or 2 sets of buds at the bottom. We usually leave 2 because something might happen to the top one and they'll die, and then you'll still get flowers. But you only really need 1 set. The 2 is just a kind of a guarantee. So like after you're done, it should look kind of like this. It should be way back. We're going to cut off a lot. Well, no, this one's cut a lot, but here's the ones. These are at our garden here in Chehalis before pruning, and here they are after pruning. And these are very old plants, about 4 to 5 feet high. And they grow, a foot, probably 12 inches each year. And we cut off, each year they're going to get bigger and bigger, but that's why you have to take some of the old ones all the way to the ground, or your plant's going to end up being way too large. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so we're going to cut it. Okay, so now the ones that flower on new growth are way easier because they're gonna bloom no matter what you do. You can still remove the old dead wood, but you can prune them anywhere you want. You can prune. Some people prune them all the way down to the ground, and you can prune them just anywhere you like. You can open up the center again. Now this isn't very good. Let's see. So this is probably a PG hydrangea here. And see, you can cut a lot more off and don't have to worry about the buds. You can just prune them almost anywhere. Okay, well, I don't know. Did that cover enough about pruning? We'll have questions here in a few minutes. Oh, but also while you're pruning, I'm going to go back to this. You can do the best way to propagate hydrangeas is by cuttings. They're very easy to root by cuttings. You could use root tone. They probably would even root without it. They are that good at it. But as long as you keep them wet, and you can go ahead and do cuttings at any time. Especially right now is a really good time to do it. because they don't have flower buds on them. You know, you would do cuttings just like you would any other shrub. And this is a great time to do it. In fact, I should be out there next week doing that. Maybe I will. So, you know what, one of the really good things about hydrangeas in our climate here is they don't get a lot of diseases and pests. There's almost nothing that bothers them. They can get some leaf spot that's like a black spot that a rose would get. That's a fungus. They can get some powdery mildew. They can get a little bit of bacterial diseases, but they're very uncommon. So it's really nice that they're kind of an easy care plant. They do get a root rot, but very rarely. They can get aphids, but again, very rarely. Spider mites too. I've seen almost no pests or diseases on thousands and thousands of hydrangeas that I've seen. They're just very rare. So, and they're really easy to spot because they have that big green leaf, and it's pretty easy to see something on it. So you probably won't get a lot of people asking about, you know, diseases and pests on their hydrangeas. Okay, so I'm about at the end. We're going to hopefully have some questions because that wasn't very long. Hydrangeasplus.com is the website. That's the commercial grower that's in Aurora, Oregon, just south of Portland. And they sell hydrangeas by mail order. They actually are having their open to the public sale going on right now. So if you really want to go buy some hydrangeas at really good prices and some really nice hydrangeas, this is the time to go. I saw that this year they're not open every day. They're only open every Wednesday for the whole month of May. So there's still a few more. Well, there may only be one more week to go there, but it's a great place to go get hydrangeas. And then there's lots of things about hydrangeas. Everybody's done, you know, I know, but the Better Homes and Gardens had a really nice hydrangea presentation online. All of these places have tons of things on hydrangeas, but this is where we got pictures and things from. Let's see. Okay, let's go for questions.
Okay, I have a few questions for you in the chat box. I'll start off with that first.
Okay.
I have a long planter that floods really badly in the winter during super hard rains. Will that work?
Yeah, it's not. Okay, so if the water was going to sit there for weeks, you know, any plant will drown because, you know, plants are there's still air gaps in the soil, and a plant can actually drown, except maybe willows and a few things like that. So, you know, so flooding and then draining and flooding and draining, a hydrangea would probably be fine with that. Yeah, of all plants that I can imagine, that would be my first choice. Yeah, except willow. Right.
How much lime to add to keep pink?
Okay, well, if you could test your pH, all you have to do is go test your pH and, you know, get it above 6.5 or close to 7. But I think, you know, it depends on what you're starting with. You know, if you're starting at 5 and you're trying to get to 7, I think you're going to have to test it, really. But it's quite a bit. When you're adding lime, just randomly adding it without testing, you would add a cup or 2 cups at a time. So it's not a small amount. It's a fairly large amount. But then I would add a cup and mix it in, and then water it in for a week or 2, and then test the soil. You know, and also when you're going to change the pH for a hydrangea, sometimes it takes a lot of time. It might take you all summer adding a little bit at a time. It might take you a full year before you see the result. Like if you started it now, because I know I have a blue one out here and I wanted it to be red, I could start now, but it might not be fully red until not this summer, but the summer after. And sometimes you have to keep adding to maintain a color too, because the rain is going to wash it out. So that doesn't quite answer your question, but that's how you would work at it scientifically. You know, you do pH testing.
Thanks, Gail. Next question. Are deer a problem?
No, deer are not bad. I mean, deer will eat anything eventually at some time if there's nothing better, right? I mean, I've seen deer eat. I have deer on my city street here come and eat things. They do not eat the hydrangeas. If there was nothing else to eat, they probably could, but no, they're not bad.
Okay. If you plant a cutting, how long does it take to have growth? We removed a large hydrangea last summer. It had glorious blooms on it. We replanted it when we removed it, and nothing is happening right now. No growth. Trying to determine whether it has died.
Yeah, that's not good. It would be leafed out by now. Yeah, it would be leafed out by now. Yeah, sorry. And to tell for sure, you can take your fingernail and scrape the bark. It has a really thin bark on them, and if it's brown underneath, it's dead. If it's green underneath, then give it some more time. But yeah, I'd go out and scrape it with my fingernail and see. That's not good.
Okay. I have a very old macrophylla. It is generally healthy. On occasion, the leaves do get a black border on the edges. Do I need to worry about this?
No, they'll get and it's probably late in the summer, right? What they can, yeah, they'll get a little black edge all the way around. When they get cold, the first cold spell will do that. Like in September, August, and it might get cold one night. It gets cold at night, then they get that black edge, or they can get sunburned. If they're, like I have one on the south side, which is, I didn't plant it there. It's terrible. It's very sunny there. And it gets sunburned and it'll get black on the edges from the sunburn. No matter how much you water it, because of where it is, it's always going to have too much sun. And I tried to dig it up and move it, and I moved part of it, but it just keeps coming back because it's so big and old.